Officer Luke Bennett thought it would be just another cold night on patrol until he saw a boy trying to sell his dog for $2 on the corner of Main Street. The boy was shaking, wearing no gloves in the snow, and beside him stood an old German shepherd, ears upright, eyes fierce, as if guarding the last thing that mattered. When Luke asked why, the boy whispered, "My stepdad said if I don't sell him, we both don't eat." The dog didn't flinch. The boy didn't cry, but Luke did. He didn't know it yet, but that $2 would change 3 lives forever. What unfolds next will move you to tears and remind you that second chances do exist. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story can reach. Snow drifted lazily through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a small Montana town nestled between frozen hills and fading pine forests. It was just past 10 p.m., and the winter air bit through coats like broken glass. Most storefronts had closed early, their windows glowing dimly behind drawn curtains. Only the old gas station and a flickering diner sign still lit the edge of Main Street. Officer Luke Bennett sat in the patrol SUV, parked at the corner by Sutter's Market. The heater hummed softly, trying to keep up with the chill that crept in from the floorboards. Luke was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet presence that often did more to calm people down than any raised voice ever could. His short brown hair was dusted with early silver at the temples, and his gray eyes held a weariness that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from seeing too much. Divorced. No kids. No real reason to be on patrol this late, except that solitude was often easier to manage than small talk. Then he saw them. Just beneath the street lamp across the road stood a boy, no older than 9, hunched over in a thin hoodie, jeans soaked at the cuffs, and sneakers that looked 2 sizes too big. He held a cardboard sign scrawled in thick marker, "Dog for sale, $2. Next to him sat a German shepherd, old, proud ears erect despite the snow gathering on its back. The dog's fur was a mix of sable and silver, thick around the shoulders but thinning slightly near the legs. It didn't shiver, it didn't move, it just waited, alert, watching. Luke blinked and stepped out into the cold. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the street. Up close, the boy looked even smaller. His cheeks were red with wind, lips cracked and pale. He stared at the ground when Luke approached, clutching the cardboard sign like a shield. Luke crouched down to eye level. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, then muttered, "Toby." Luke nodded. "I'm Officer Bennett." "You out here by yourself?" Toby's fingers tightened on the sign. He gave a tiny shrug. Luke glanced at the dog. "And this your partner?" At that, the boy looked up. His eyes were green but dulled by exhaustion and something heavier, something that shouldn't live behind the eyes of a child. "He's Atlas," Toby said. "My mom gave him to me when I turned 4. Luke's chest tightened. "And where's your mom now?" The silence that followed said more than any words could. Toby looked back down at the snow. Luke softened his voice. "Why are you trying to sell him?" Toby swallowed. "My stepdad said, if I don't get money for food, he's going to throw Atlas out. Or worse." Luke stood slowly, jaw clenched. "Where's your stepdad now?" "At home." "Probably drunk," Toby whispered. Luke turned to the dog. Atlas hadn't moved. Just stared up at him, ears sharp, like he understood every word. His breathing was steady, his eyes intelligent. Loyal, but guarded. Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He counted out 2 single-dollar bills and handed them to Toby. "For the dog," Luke said gently. "Deal?" Toby blinked at the money. His hands trembled as he took it. "You're really buying him?" Luke knelt again. "Not exactly. Just making sure he stays with you. But first, both of you are coming with me." Toby's eyes widened, panic starting to rise. "I didn't do anything wrong." "No, son," Luke said firmly. "You did everything right. Now, let me help." He opened the back door of the cruiser. Atlas didn't move until Toby gave a soft pat to his shoulder. Then the old shepherd stood and followed, dignified and calm, even as snow melted into his paws. Inside the cruiser, Toby slid into the back seat. Atlas jumped in after him and immediately curled his body around the boy like a shield. Luke started the engine and turned the heat up. He took one glance at the boy huddled next to the dog in the rearview mirror, then pulled away from the curb. Tonight, Willow Creek had gone quiet, but something had just begun. The sun barely broke through the gray sky when Luke unlocked the precinct door. The morning chill still clung to the streets of Willow Creek, and a thin mist hovered low, wrapping around the tires of the patrol car like smoke. Inside the station, the air was warmer, but the quiet had a weight to it. Luke led Toby through the narrow hallway, with Atlas walking in step beside them, head high, tail low, ears flicking at every sound. The boy hadn't spoken much since the night before, but he hadn't let go of the dog's collar either. Luke noticed the way Atlas seemed to lean into him, not for guidance, but to reassure. They entered the break room, a cramped space with a coffee maker that hissed more than it brewed and a stack of day-old donuts someone forgot to cover. Luke set a bowl of water on the floor for Atlas, then microwaved a cup of oatmeal for Toby. "You ever had maple brown sugar?" Luke asked. Toby nodded, eyes fixed on the rising steam. Luke placed the bowl in front of him and pulled a chair nearby. "You don't have to say anything yet, but I do need to make sure you're okay. That means seeing a doctor. Is that all right?" After a long pause, Toby finally gave a small nod. Luke made the call. An hour later, Dr. Elise Walker arrived. She was in her early 30s, petite but sharp-eyed, with sandy blonde hair tied into a low braid and a faded green parka that looked like it had seen a dozen winters. Elise had a calmness to her, the kind that came from long hours with animals that couldn't speak their pain. She carried a worn leather bag in one hand and a soft expression in the other. She knelt down first beside Atlas, her voice a murmur. "You're a handsome old boy, aren't you?" Atlas tilted his head slightly, then leaned in to sniff her hand. His body stayed still, alert but not tense. Elise ran her hands gently over his ribs and flanks. "Underweight? Hips a bit stiff, maybe arthritis, but no visible injuries. His coat's thin near the belly. That's from sleeping on cold ground. Toby, sitting nearby, watched every move." "Has he been eating?" Elise asked Luke. "Polished off 2 bowls since last night," Luke replied. "He's tough," she said, "but he's been through more than people realize." Then she turned to Toby. "Hi there," Elise said softly, kneeling to his level. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. Just need to check a few things to make sure you're safe." Toby looked at Luke, and Luke gave him a nod. "It's okay, buddy." "She's here to help." With some hesitation, Toby allowed Elise to lift his sleeves. What she found turned her breath shallow, faint yellowing bruises up both arms, faint finger-shaped marks near the wrist, a healing cut behind the ear. Rib area sensitive to the touch. Old wounds, not from playing or falling, but deliberate force. Elise's jaw tightened. "These aren't new. They didn't all come at once either." She looked at Luke. "I'm going to document everything, but this is serious." Luke nodded. "I know." Toby's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. Instead, he curled his fingers into the thick fur on Atlas's neck, burying his face just below the ear. Elise gently brushed his hair back. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. You hear me?" Toby gave the smallest of nods. When Elise left to make her report, Deputy Mara Duvall walked into the room with a paper bag and 2 steaming cups from the diner down the block. Mara was 28, lean and athletic, with auburn hair always pulled back into a tight ponytail. She had a sarcastic streak with adults, but with kids, something in her tone always softened. "Morning, boss," she said, handing Luke a coffee. Then she turned to Toby. "And for you, young man, I got you something." She pulled a slim, dog-eared book from her bag. "This was my favorite when I was your age. Tales of the Brave and Furry. It's got a whole story about a German shepherd that saves a town from a flood. Think Atlas would like it?" Toby didn't answer, but he took the book in both hands like it might crumble. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Just a little. but it was real. Mara smiled back, her voice light. "I'll take that as a yes." Luke, leaning against the doorway, felt something shift in the air. Not much, but just enough to matter. After Mara left the room, Luke sat beside Toby. "Hey, I need to ask a few questions about your stepdad. Is that okay?" Toby tensed, but Atlas moved closer, sitting tall with his shoulder pressed into the boy's side. "When was the last time you ate at home?" "Day before yesterday," Toby said softly. "Did he ever hit Atlas?" Toby nodded. "With the broom sometimes, but Atlas always took it. Never bit him." Luke's hands curled into fists in his lap, but his voice stayed calm. "What's your stepdad's name?" "Ray. Ray Harlan." Luke wrote it down. "Do you know where your dad is?" "Your real dad?" Toby shook his head. "Mom never said. She just called him someone long gone." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Atlas's tail against the floor. Slow, steady grounding. Luke closed his notebook. "Okay, that's enough for now." Toby leaned against Atlas, who licked his cheek once, then settled beside him like a statue carved for warmth. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, and faint sunlight pushed through the clouds. But inside that quiet little station, something more important had started to rise. Trust. And Luke knew it wouldn't be easy. But this kid and this dog deserved better than bruises and silence. They deserved safety, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance at family. Maple Hollow was a town where people tended to mind their own business unless a storm was brewing. And lately, the storm had a name. Ray Doyle. That morning, the frost had melted into a thin glaze of rain, leaving the sidewalk slick and the sky draped in gray. Luke Bennett adjusted his Navy patrol jacket and stepped out of his cruiser, his boots crunching the gravel as he walked up to the modest porch of a worn-out house 2 blocks from the station. Mrs. Eleanor Davies opened the door, a woman in her 70s with silver curls tucked into a floral scarf and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. Her knit cardigan sagged at the elbows, and her eyes darted behind Luke toward the street as if checking whether anyone was watching. "I've seen that boy," she said before he could speak. "Toby. Poor thing used to knock on my back door asking for bread scraps. Always polite, always hungry." Luke took notes silently, nodding. He had a way of letting silence do the asking. She stepped out slightly. "And the shouting from Ray's house, it'd rattle the windows. I've called once, but he always managed to sweet-talk his way out of trouble." Her voice cracked slightly. "We all thought maybe someone else would say something." Luke thanked her and moved on. The next stop was the corner grocery, where Mr. Henley, an elderly grocer with stooped shoulders and thick glasses, remembered Toby coming in with coins clutched in a small fist, always buying the cheapest crackers. Luke's final visit that morning was to a trailer on the edge of town, where a teenage girl named Sierra Lee, about 16 with the tangled red hair and a flannel jacket several sizes too big, hesitated before speaking. "I'd see him sometimes," she said, hands stuffed in her pockets. "He used to sit outside the school fence and just watch the other kids, like he wanted to be part of it but didn't know how." Meanwhile, back at the station, Toby was curled up on a bench with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The warmth of the room contrasted with the storm still clinging to the town. His small body leaned slightly toward Atlas, the 11-year-old German shepherd who sat pressed against him like a living wall. Atlas, strong, alert, with amber fur thickened from winter and keen eyes that missed nothing. Watched every door, every step. When someone unfamiliar entered, his ears would tilt slightly, gaze sharp. But around Toby, he softened head low, eyes gentle. Elise Moreno entered the room briefly, offering Toby a muffin. Elise was the town's veterinarian, in her mid-30s, with dark brown hair tied back in a braid and kind, analytical eyes behind clear-framed glasses. She had examined both boy and dog the day before, and had stayed involved ever since. "He still flinches when someone lifts their hand near him," she murmured to Luke later, "not out of fear." Out of habit, by late afternoon, a new visitor arrived at the station, Pastor Graham. Tall, in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair, a neat goatee, and eyes that carried the weight of too many funerals and not enough baptisms, Pastor Graham had a quiet strength. He wore a charcoal coat over a navy sweater, and his tone was never forceful, but it settled into the soul. "I heard about the boy," he said. "I'd like to invite him to our youth group this weekend." Nothing formal, just music, stories, warm food, and some kids his age. Luke glanced at Toby, still tucked beside Atlas. "He's, not used to groups." Pastor Graham nodded slowly. "Then we start with kindness, not pressure." As they spoke, Toby glanced up shyly, overhearing just enough. Atlas nudged him gently with his nose, and the boy's hand reached to scratch the dog's fur without thinking. Later that evening, Luke offered to walk Toby home to the temporary foster care placement arranged through the station. The boy hesitated. Can Atlas come?" he whispered. Luke's response was instant. "He's not going anywhere without you." As they walked through the light drizzle, Toby holding onto the dog's leash, a strange calm settled over the streets. Each time a car passed or someone raised their voice, Atlas's body would stiffen slightly, placing himself between Toby and the source. It wasn't just protection. It was declaration. This boy wasn't alone anymore. And as the three of them disappeared down the fog-wrapped sidewalk, a curtain shifted from a window across the street. Eleanor Davies, with her hands clasped near her chest, whispered to herself, "Thank the Lord someone finally did something." The morning sky over Maple Hollow was washed in pale gray, a soft drizzle misting the quiet streets. At the local police station, a small brick building nestled between the diner and the post office, the scent of damp paper and stale coffee lingered in the air. Inside, Luke sat at his desk, reviewing old reports with tired eyes. Atlas lay curled near Toby's feet in the corner of the room, his head resting on his front paws, but his eyes ever watchful. Toby, thin and pale, sat quietly with a worn blanket draped over his shoulders, leafing through a comic book Mara had brought earlier. His small fingers trembled slightly, and the healing bruise beneath his eye still hinted at a pain not yet fully spoken. Every so often he'd glance at Atlas and reach out to touch the thick fur along the dog's back. Atlas didn't move, but his tail thumped once in silent understanding. The peace shattered abruptly when the front door burst open. Rain and the sharp smell of alcohol entered with Ray, a man in his late 40s with a wide, heavy build, unshaven jaw, and bloodshot eyes that darted wildly around the room. His stained flannel shirt clung to his damp skin, and the reek of whiskey hit Luke like a punch. "Where's my boy?" Ray bellowed, slamming the door shut behind him. "I know you've got him here." Luke stood slowly. "Ray, you're intoxicated. This isn't the way to handle anything. You need to calm down." "I am calm," Ray snarled, staggering forward. His boots scraped across the tile. "You think you can take my kid? You think you've got that right?" Atlas stood, ears high, muscles tense. Ray's eyes locked onto the boy. "Toby!" he barked. "You come here right now!" The child froze. His hand dropped from the page. Fear returned to his face in an instant. Ray took 2 lurching steps toward him, but he never made it any farther. With a guttural growl that seemed to come from deep within his chest, Atlas moved like lightning. He darted forward, placing himself squarely between Ray and Toby, teeth bared, tail rigid, every inch of him a shield. The deep rumble of his growl echoed through the station. Ray flinched, stumbling back. "Call off that damn mutt!" Luke didn't flinch. He reached for the handcuffs clipped to his belt. "Raymond Greaves, you're under arrest for disorderly conduct and attempting to intimidate a minor. Turn around. You can't do this. He's my blood," Ray shouted, but his steps were uneven, his breath heavy. "I have eyewitness testimony, medical records, and a dog who just proved more fatherly than you've ever been," Luke said, voice calm but resolute. Ray shoved Luke in a final desperate lurch, but it was clumsy, sluggish. In one practiced motion, Luke twisted his arm behind his back and cuffed him, ignoring the string of slurred curses that followed. "You'll pay for this, Hart!" Ray spat as he was led out. "That brat ain't nothing but trouble." Luke didn't respond. He just glanced toward Toby, who sat frozen, knees pulled to his chest. Atlas returned to the boy's side, resting his head gently on Toby's knee, nuzzling close. Only then did the child start to cry. Later, the station settled once more. Luke filed the arrest report while Atlas remained with Toby in the small break room, a blanket now wrapped around both of them. Elise had stopped by briefly to check on Toby, her voice soft as she assured him that Ray wouldn't come back. She promised to return with some soup later, her gentle presence a balm after the storm. Mara arrived next, her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun, a knit scarf draped over her shoulders. "I heard yelling," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Is he safe?" Luke nodded. "He's safe." Thanks to Atlas, Mara stepped into the break room and sat beside the boy. "You were very brave," she whispered. "That dog of yours, too." Toby didn't speak, but he nodded just once. That evening, as Luke turned off the lights and leaned against the wall watching the two figures, child and dog curled up side by side, he let out a long breath. The storm hadn't passed. Not yet. But today, at least, a line had been drawn, and behind that line stood Atlas. The courthouse in Maple Hollow was a modest brick building tucked between the library and the fire station. It wasn't grand, but today it felt monumental. Luke adjusted his tie as he walked in, Toby beside him holding tightly to his hand. The boy wore a collared shirt a size too big, his blonde hair brushed carefully to one side. He looked smaller than ever in the vast courtroom, but standing close behind was Atlas ears upright, stance firm, eyes sharp. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as people filtered in. On the bench sat Judge Miriam Whitmore, a woman in her early 60s with steely gray eyes and neatly braided silver hair. Known in town as stern but fair, she had served the county for nearly 3 decades. She took one look at Ray as the man stumbled into the courtroom in a wrinkled shirt and loose tie, and her expression hardened. Ray's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Carl Jennings, tried to appear composed, though beads of sweat lined his temple. "Your Honor," he began, "my client is here to request reinstatement of custody over his nephew." "There has been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Elise cut in from the witness stand. The vet stood straight-backed, her brown eyes calm but resolute. "Your Honor, I examined Toby just days ago." The bruises on his ribs were not from one fall, they were consistent with repeated impacts over time, and the malnourishment. This wasn't accidental. The judge nodded. "Continue, doctor." Moreno Elise added, "The dog, Atlas, showed signs of emotional stress when placed near Ray. It's not definitive proof, but it's telling, and Toby—" She glanced toward the boy. "Toby hasn't spoken to anyone but the dog since arriving at the station, except when Mr. Bennett is near a middle-aged woman with short graying curls and a floral blouse stepped into the witness box next. I'm Judith Mayfield. I live 2 houses down. I saw Toby knocking on neighbors' doors more than once asking for food. We thought Ray was going through a rough patch, but—" She shook her head. "That boy was raising himself." Another neighbor testified, then a third. One mentioned hearing shouting through the thin walls. Another admitted seeing Ray throw a bottle across his porch in anger. Ray, seated beside his lawyer, was fidgeting, his jaw clenched. "They're lying," he muttered under his breath. "All of them." Then came the moment no one expected. The judge looked at Luke. "Sheriff Bennett, is the child willing to speak?" Luke turned to Toby, who had remained in the front row with Atlas. The dog hadn't left his side all morning. When the boy looked up at Luke, his gray eyes were wide with fear. Hook knelt beside him. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," he whispered. Toby stared forward, then placed his hand gently on Atlas's back. The dog didn't move, but his steady presence anchored the boy. With a small nod, Toby stood. There was a collective breath held as he stepped toward the witness stand. His voice was a whisper, barely louder than the sound of pages turning. He hit me. When I dropped things." Toby looked down. He said it was my fault Mama left. Said if I cried, he'd send me away like he did. Atlas gasps rippled through the courtroom. Luke's knuckles whitened where he gripped the wooden railing. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. And how do you feel living with Sheriff Bennett? Toby clutched the sleeve of his shirt. Safe, he said. Why? Toby's eyes flicked to Atlas, who sat just below the stand. Because he's not afraid of yelling. And Atlas... He stays. The judge turned toward Ray. Mr. Greaves, you have a history of intoxication, community complaints, and now multiple witnesses testifying to abuse. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Ray stood abruptly. That mutt turned my boy against me. You let strangers steal my blood. His voice echoed harshly across the courtroom. Judge Whitmore's gavel struck sharply. Enough. Bailiff, remove Mr. Greaves. As Ray was escorted out, still shouting, Toby flinched, then instinctively looked toward Atlas. The German shepherd met his gaze, unmoving, a silent pillar of calm. After a moment of silence, Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses and spoke. Given the testimonies, the physical evidence, and the clear emotional bond the child shares with Sheriff Bennett and the dog Atlas, I am granting temporary guardianship to Sheriff Luke Bennett, effective immediately. Mr. Greaves is hereby stripped of custody, pending further investigation. A soft murmur filled the courtroom as Luke exhaled slowly, placing a reassuring hand on Toby's shoulder. The boy leaned into him slightly, not fully, but enough to show the first roots of trust taking hold. Later that afternoon, back at the station, Pastor Graham stopped by. A tall man in his 70s, with a kind face lined by age and a silver cross pinned to his wool vest, he offered a gentle smile. I heard the news, he said, shaking Luke's hand. God doesn't always move in thunder. Sometimes he sends help on 4 legs. He turned to Toby and held out a wrapped parcel. Children's Bible. Pictures and simple words. No pressure. Just thought he might want a story that says not all endings are sad. Toby didn't answer, but he took the book with both hands. As they watched him quietly leaf through the pages beside Atlas, Luke murmured to the pastor, You think I'm cut out for this? Graham chuckled. Son, none of us are, but the ones who ask the question are usually the ones who'll do right. That night, Luke sat on the porch while Toby curled up with Atlas on the living room rug. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel hollow. Only the wind stirred through the trees, and the soft click of Atlas's claws on the wooden floor reminded Luke that sometimes protection didn't come with a badge, but with fur, loyalty, and quiet vigilance. The air in Maple Hollow had softened since the hearing. For the first time in weeks, the police station wasn't filled with tension, but with a quiet, unfamiliar warmth. Luke Bennett sat on the bench outside the precinct, watching the early spring sunlight pour over the sidewalks. Beside him, Toby sat cross-legged, one hand resting naturally on the fur of Atlas. The German shepherd who had become more than just a dog, he was the boy's silent shield. Toby was different now. Not loud or carefree, but no longer cowering in corners either. He had started talking, just fragments at first, then slowly, like stones skipping across still water, his memories came to the surface. My mom gave me Atlas, he said one morning as they sat beneath the willow behind the station. His voice was hesitant, almost unsure if it was safe to say the words aloud. I was 4. It was my birthday. She said he'd protect me even when she couldn't. Luke turned to him gently. What was her name? Toby traced a line in the dirt with his shoe. Jenna. She smelled like cinnamon. But after she disappeared, Ray said she left because of me. Luke didn't say anything right away. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. That wasn't your fault, Toby. Never was. You hear me? The boy nodded slightly, and his fingers curled tighter into Atlas's fur. The dog, sensing the emotion, leaned into Toby's side without a sound. That evening, Luke filed a formal petition for permanent guardianship. The temporary ruling from Judge Whitmore had given them a window, and Luke wasn't going to let it close. He gathered records, character references, and even included a hand-drawn picture Toby had made, Atlas sitting in front of a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. At the church, Pastor Graham had been watching the boy's progress closely. A tall, wiry man with kind but probing eyes, he'd seen too many lost children drift through Maple Hollow's pews over the years. But there was something in Toby that sparked hope, and something in Atlas that made the boy feel invincible. Pastor Graham approached Luke one Sunday after service. "We're hosting a picnic this week, for the younger kids. Maybe Toby would want to come?" Luke hesitated. "He's not good with groups?" The pastor smiled. "Neither is Atlas, I'd guess. But sometimes all it takes is one kind laugh to change a child's rhythm." On the day of the picnic, the churchyard was buzzing. Tables were loaded with lemonade, watermelon slices, and stacks of hot dogs. Children ran wild through the grass while folding chairs scraped across pavement, and parents gossiped under the shade of oaks. Toby stood at the edge of the gathering, hands tucked in his hoodie, watching. His eyes darted from group to group, unsure if he belonged in any of them, but Atlas stood firm beside him, tail low but wagging gently. When a red rubber ball rolled near, the dog perked up. With a few quick steps, Atlas picked up the ball and trotted back toward Toby only to drop it and run a playful circle around him. The children nearby laughed. Toby blinked. Then, without thinking, he picked up the ball and tossed it gently. Atlas bolted after it, tail high, and brought it back like it was the most important mission of his life. The next throw came faster, then another. Toby's giggle burst out sharp, surprised, bright. Pastor Graham, standing near the grill, turned to Luke with a knowing glance. "It's starting." After lunch, the kids played tag, and although Toby stayed on the sidelines, Atlas never left his side. When a girl named Sophia, spirited, freckled 8-year-old with missing front teeth, invited Toby to join, Atlas gave a short bark as if approving the idea. Toby looked at Luke for reassurance. Luke gave a thumbs up. "Go for it." With cautious steps, Toby entered the circle. Soon, he was running, not fast, not recklessly, but running, with Atlas bounding beside him like a shadow made of joy. Later that night, as Luke helped him into his pajamas at the station's makeshift guest room, Toby yawned wide. "I didn't know I could laugh again," he murmured. Luke ruffled his hair. "Sometimes you just need the right dog and a good game of fetch." Toby smiled, small but sincere. In the quiet, after lights out, Luke sat in his office, looking over the guardianship papers again. The boy had a long way to go, but trust was being built, brick by careful brick, with a dog's steady gaze and the gentleness of a world beginning to right itself. He leaned back and whispered to the empty room, "We're getting there, kiddo." From the hallway, a soft thump of paws padded closer. Atlas poked his head in, then lay beside the office door, one ear alert, the other slightly bent from age, as if he too was standing guard over the path being laid. They weren't a complete family yet. But for the first time in years, the shape of something whole was beginning to form. The morning mist still clung to the rolling hills of Maple Hollow as Luke pulled into the gravel parking lot of the K-9 training facility. It was a modest center on the edge of town, surrounded by open fields, obstacle courses, and rows of agility equipment painted in faded red and blue. Luke stepped out of the cruiser and opened the back door. Atlas, the aging German shepherd, leapt out with surprising grace for his 10 years, his sable coat streaked with silver catching the light. His bent left ear twitched as he scanned the area, tail swaying steadily, alert but calm. Toby clambered out from the passenger seat, his blue hoodie tucked into his jeans, eyes wide with a mix of nervousness and pride. "Do you think they'll like him?" he whispered, clutching the strap of his small backpack. Luke smiled and gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "They're not here to like him, Toby. They're here to see what he's still capable of." Inside the center, they were greeted by Travis Harlan, a lean, no-nonsense man in his early 50s with cropped gray hair, sun-baked skin, and sharp brown eyes. A former military K-9 handler, Travis carried himself with a quiet authority. His dark green tactical vest bore a patch that read, Trainer Harlan. He shook Luke's hand firmly, then knelt to eye level with Atlas, observing the dog's posture, reaction time, and muscle tone. "You've got a smart one here," Travis muttered, running a hand along Atlas's spine. "Old, sure, but look at those eyes." He remembers everything. Atlas stood still under the touch, then lifted his paw without being asked, a gesture from training long past. Travis raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "I'll be damned." The first test was basic obedience. Travis barked short commands. "Sit." "Stay." Down Atlas obeyed each one without hesitation. His ears remained perked, and even the scar on his hind leg didn't seem to slow his responses. Toby stood behind the fence, clutching the wire tightly, face beaming. Then came scent work. Travis led Atlas to the scent training field, where several metal containers were laid out. One of them held a small metal key unmarked and scented with oil. Travis handed Luke a cloth with the scent on it. Luke held it out, and Atlas sniffed it intently. "Let's see what that nose remembers," Travis said quietly. Atlas moved forward slowly, tail still, ears twitching. He sniffed one container, then another, pausing, then moving on. Finally, he stopped before the third one, sat down, and tapped it gently with his paw. "Correct," Travis called. "That's the one." Toby let out a whoop of joy and ran up to the fence. "That's my dog," he shouted, jumping in place. Atlas turned, tail wagging. Travis gave a low whistle. "He's got tracking memory sharper than some of our rookies." No hesitation. That's not just instinct. That's training reinforced by bond. As the day wore on, Travis tested Atlas on agility low hurdles, tunnels, a narrow beam. While he wasn't as fast as the young dogs, he was precise. He moved with purpose, like a soldier who had done it all before and knew when to conserve energy. At one point, Toby was allowed onto the field. Travis gave him a tennis ball and nodded. "Let's see how he does with the one he trusts most." Toby raised the ball high, then tossed it across the field. Atlas dashed after it, ignoring distractions, whistles, fake gunshots, even a mechanical rabbit used to lure younger dogs off track. He retrieved the ball, trotted back, and dropped it into Toby's waiting hands. Travis stood with arms crossed, nodding slowly. "He's earned it." Luke tilted his head. "Earned what?" "A badge. Not for patrol, not anymore. But we give honorary titles to retired service dogs who still meet the standards. Community engagement, school visits, therapy support. He's ready." Toby's eyes lit up. "Does that mean Atlas is like a real officer?" "As real as they come," Travis said. "You'd be surprised how many kids listen better when there's a dog with a badge in the room." Later that afternoon, in a small ceremony near the training yard, Travis presented a blue nylon collar with a silver medallion. Engraved on it were the words, Honorary K9, Guardian Atlas. Toby carefully removed Atlas's worn leather collar and replaced it with the new one, his hands trembling slightly. "You earned this," he whispered to the dog. Atlas licked his hand gently and leaned into him as if understanding the weight of the moment. Travis gave them a parting gift, a chew toy shaped like a police badge, and shook Luke's hand one last time. "You brought back a warrior." Let him do what he does best, protect. As they drove home, Toby sat in the back seat beside Atlas, one hand resting on his back. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" he asked suddenly. Luke glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "I know she would." Atlas let out a contented huff and rested his head on Toby's lap, eyes closing slowly as the sun dipped behind the hills. The courtroom smelled of old wood and coffee, and the rain outside tapped gently against the stained windows of Willow County Courthouse. Luke sat quietly on the bench, wearing a dark navy button-up shirt tucked into his belt, his expression calm but tense. Beside him, Toby clutched Atlas's collar, his small fingers buried in the dog's thick fur. Atlas sat still, alert, his upright ears twitching at every movement, eyes never leaving the man standing before the judge. Ray stood at the defendant's table in a wrinkled gray shirt, eyes bloodshot, his scraggly beard unshaved. His posture sagged, not out of guilt, but exhaustion, the kind born from decades of bitterness and alcohol. He didn't look at Toby, not once. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Ruth Hammond, peered over her glasses at the stack of documents before her. "Mr. Rayford James," she began, "after reviewing the psychological evaluation, the school's disciplinary records, testimony from Officer Luke Bennett, the veterinarian's photos of the dog's condition, and Toby's own statements, this court finds you unfit for guardianship." Ray muttered something under his breath. Judge Hammond continued without pause. "You are hereby sentenced to 18 months in a correctional facility for child endangerment and animal neglect. Upon release, a restraining order will be in place barring you from approaching within 500 yards of the child." Toby's grip on Atlas tightened. Luke gently placed a hand on the boy's back. Ray didn't argue. He didn't cry. He simply nodded once and shuffled as the bailiff cuffed him and led him out. Just like that, the man who once held power over Toby's world was gone. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Clouds broke just enough to let through a sliver of gold light. The sun climbed higher above Willow Creek that morning, pushing gentle rays through the thinning autumn clouds as if the sky itself had been waiting for this day. The chill still hung in the air, but it no longer bit it soothed. The town was stirring earlier than usual, not because of sirens or scandal, but because something rare was about to happen, a celebration of healing. Luke stood in front of his modest cottage, buttoning his crisp sheriff's uniform, freshly pressed and spotless. He looked different than usual, less weighed down. His short, sandy-brown hair had been trimmed. His clean-shaven face still carried lines of exhaustion, but today they curled upward in a rare smile. Behind him, through the screen door, the clatter of a spoon tapping a mug echoed as Toby tried to pour hot cocoa without spilling too much. Atlas sat tall on the porch steps, fur groomed to a proud sheen. His coat, once matted and dull when he was rescued for $2, now shimmered with rich sable and dark streaks. His ears stood erect, his left paw crossed over the right in a dignified pose. There was no longer fear in his eyes, only calm watchfulness. Around his neck hung a new leather collar, polished and thick, and from it a custom tag gleamed in the light. Old Guardian of Willow Creek. The townsfolk gathered in the park at midday, children chasing leaves while adults laid out picnic blankets. There was laughter, unfamiliar, unforced. In the center of the lawn, a small wooden stage had been built. Garland of dried corn stalks and sunflowers framed the platform, crafted by the church women, led by Mrs. Emery, the retired schoolteacher with silver curls and hands that never stopped moving. She fussed over every ribbon, muttering to herself about symmetry. Pastor Graham stood near the podium, flipping through his notes. He wore his simple black robe with a blue scarf stitched with white doves. His voice, usually used for Sunday sermons, would today speak not of sin or salvation, but of belonging. Toby stepped onto the stage wearing a blazer a size too big, the sleeves nearly hiding his hands. He walked beside Luke, clutching his new birth certificate. His blonde hair was neatly combed, his cheeks pink with nervous pride. Behind them, Atlas climbed the stage steps on command and sat beside Toby, ever steady. Pastor Graham began, his voice calm and warm. "Today, we do something rare. We mark a beginning, not an end. A boy who once had no one now has a father. A dog once forgotten now leads us, and a town that once looked the other way now stands together." He turned to Luke. "Sheriff Bennett, do you vow to care for this child as your own, to protect, guide, and love him?" Luke placed a hand on Toby's shoulder and said simply, "I do." Then he knelt to eye level with the boy. "And Toby, do you choose to call this man your dad?" Toby nodded, eyes glassy, then whispered, "Yeah, he's my real dad now." The crowd erupted in applause, but it was Atlas who drew every eye next. On cue, he stood, took 3 measured steps forward, and let out a single bark, not loud, not fearful, but strong. His tail held level, his posture noble. For a moment, silence returned. Then came the clapping again, this time louder, and someone in the crowd shouted, "That dog's got more honor than half this town." Later, as the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Emery approached with a wooden plaque wrapped in brown cloth. Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped it and passed it to Toby. "I made this for you, sweetheart," she said, her voice gravelly. "A home needs its name." The plaque was simple. Bennett and Atlas and Toby, home. The letters were hand-carved, painted in deep green, and varnished until they caught the light. That evening, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, Luke helped Toby mount the sign beside the front steps. They hammered in the nails together, the thuds echoing into the quiet evening. Atlas sat behind them, tail curled neatly around his side. As the final nail went in, Toby stepped back and admired the sign. "Do you think Mom would have liked it?" he asked softly. Luke wrapped an arm around his shoulder. "I think she'd be proud of you." And proud of Atlas, too. They stood in silence, watching the porch light flicker on. Inside, a kettle hissed on the stove, and warm smells drifted from a pan of cinnamon apples that Mrs. Emery had insisted on bringing over. Atlas rose, stretched, and nudged the boy gently with his nose. Luke glanced down. "He wants you to go in first." "Guardian's job, you know," Toby laughed, the sound light and real. He opened the door wide. "Come on, Atlas." Welcome home. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not thunderous events from the sky, but quiet moments of courage, compassion, and second chances. A boy once forgotten. A dog once discarded. A man once lost in silence. And yet, through love, they became a family. This story reminds us that no soul is too broken to be mended, no past too dark to find light again. God doesn't always send angels with wings, sometimes. He sends them on 4 legs with loyal eyes and quiet strength. Atlas wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a healer, a reminder that hope still walks among us. In our own lives, we may feel overlooked or defeated, but never forget, God sees, God restores, and God redeems. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Let's spread this message of faith across the world. Hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. And if you believe that God still works miracles through loyalty and love, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and all those you hold dear.